Welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited. Today is finally the day. Fantasy Overwatch is officially in season with Draftbuff enabling their Fantasy Overwatch drafts. We can officially start Fantasy Overwatch. So this will be the first and probably one of the only episodes where I don't break down game film. If you're here just for that, then turn off the video now. But if you're here to enjoy Overwatch through Fantasy Overwatch, which is my personal favorite way to enjoy, then I've got some ranks to share with you where I rank all of the players, nearly all of the players, all the way down to 150. And I'll be sharing that with you through a link in the show notes, as well as starting up a fantasy league. So if you're looking for one to join, play with me. We'll have a good time. So with drafts open, I wanted to give a very brief outline on fantasy theory and how it works. I'm going to actually take a quick look at the Draftbuff ranks and tell you why my ranks are better than their ranks. Of course they are. They aren't, the Draftbuff ones, they aren't terrible, but I've been doing this for a little bit longer, and I think while overall the ranks are good, I have a bone to pick with a few of them, and I'm going to tell you why. Not going to spend too much time on it. And then last, I'll have some logistics. I'll be starting a Draftbuff league that if you want to play with me, I'll send a link over for that. And then if you have any questions about Fantasy Overwatch, I will talk on Twitter or on Discord anytime. And then last, if you want to hop on a 30-minute phone call, I will do that with you as well. So some details on that. If that's all you're here for, then skip to the end here. Let's get to it. First thing, a few things on fantasy theory. So on the right, I have my ranks for 2021. I will be updating them up until the start of the season, like when the Valiant officially join. They'll be ranked towards the bottom, but I'll at least rank them. And on the left, I have some old stats in case we want to reference it, but I do a lot of statistical analysis. Nothing too fancy, nothing genius level, but I do regularly use StatsLab to make my own dashboards to review stats. That said, I've also been playing fantasy sports for a long time, longer than I'd like to admit. And from that, I have built out some theories on fantasy that I've translated over to Overwatch. So let's start with those. How do we rank players? And really, I have a general framework for ranking players. It doesn't make sense in terms of Overwatch League knowledge. You have to play Fantasy Overwatch. You aren't trying to craft the best Overwatch League team. You're trying to craft a team that outputs the best stats. Fantasy Overwatch is based on damage, healing, final blows, and deaths. That's it. Pretty simple, but you'll find that even though they're really simple stats, the better players tend towards the top. That said, you start 2 DPS, 2 tank, and 2 support. The statistical anomalies that may not be obvious at the very start are flex supports put out way more stats than main supports, and then flex tanks put out way more stats than main tanks. The very first and most important thing is that your top tier flex supports are your best players in Fantasy Overwatch. The general concept behind it is the difference between flex supports and main supports is bigger than the difference between any other two positions. And fantasy is all about supply and demand. You need the best players putting up the most stats in the most starved positions, and flex support is number 1. Number 2 is your top tier flex tanks. If we look at last year, on a per match basis, Hanbin was actually the highest scorer amongst all positions. Not raw points, but relative to others at his own position. So he was, on a per game basis, the best player in Fantasy Overwatch. In red, you'll see here the other tanks, Gargoyle, Space. Somehow Nevix was that high. Void. Nope. They all did extremely well statistically. You'll see that there's more flex, there's more supports near the top than anyone else, with a few exceptions to the rule. But for the most part, those flex supports and those flex tanks are the 2 most valuable positions, with some DPSs in between. So going back to this list, I have good flex supports on a team that is decent with 100% playtime is the number 3. It's not really all that intuitive, but you might look at someone like Bebe, who you're like, I don't really get excited about him no matter where you sit. He might actually be more valuable than someone like Exy, who you think is a superstar playmaker potential. That's because Bebe is going to churn out stats week in, week out. Whereas Eggsy, yeah, when he plays, he's going to do really well. But Doha and Sparkle are really good, and sometimes he's going to get benched. And if you're looking for that consistent output week over week, I actually view Bebe as a better fantasy prospect than Eggsy, which once again doesn't make sense Overwatch-wise, but we're playing fantasy Overwatch. We're not trying to build the best Overwatch League team. If you look down the rest of the list, top tier DPSs with 100% playtime. I know it's very hard to predict. I put guys like Prophet, like Decay. Who else do I have up there? Yaki. In that category, you never really know 100% playtime, but those guys are going to be extremely valuable. Once again, if we look at the previous year, Birdring was actually the highest scorer. He rarely, if ever, got benched for the Gladiators. Same for Yaki, same for BQB. No way would I ever say BQB is the third best DPS in Overwatch. But because he never got benched and he played high-value hit scans, he was great in fantasy. So those are the kinds of things that you kind of have to rework how your brain works on Overwatch, and you have to get in a fantasy mindset. So I hope this is a good general framework to understand fantasy. But at the very least, you've got my ranks here that should not steer you too far wrong. I want to bring up a few notable disagreements I have with Draftbuff's rankings. Like I said, I think they did a good job, but there's a few that did not make sense to me, and I want to give some lessons learned there. Let's start with Kareev and Creative. Draftbuff's ranks have them at 46 and 47, and I have them at 18 and 24 respectively. It's the idea of undervaluing the decent flex support who doesn't excite you. I mentioned Bebe earlier. These guys, while I get the thought process behind it, it's very unlikely that they ever get benched, and as I said, those flex supports are going to score well. I personally am a fan of Creative and have him ranked at 18. I feel like he's an underrated player. Kareev, I don't love Kareev. He's never really excited me that much, but year in, year out, he tends to be top 10, top 20 or so fantasy-wise, just because he is there, cranking out the heals and, in turn doing some damage as well. So you don't want to undervalue those kinds of guys. If we look at Kareev from last year, look at that. I mean, he's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's the 7th ranked player in fantasy. Doesn't make sense when you look at Overwatch League talent, but that's how things work sometimes. You're trying to pick the statistical outliers, not necessarily player skill. For example, both these guys are behind DM in Draftbuff rankings, and DM may not see the server. He might not be on the server that much. They got Lip, they got Fleta, they got Erster. It's dangerous to take a guy who's going to be in and out of the lineup for guaranteed points week in, week out. Next up, we got Fielder. Draftbuff has him ranked at 23, and I have him ranked at 43. After watching preseason and watching Dallas construct the roster, I have real concerns that Fielder is going to be benched from time to time for Repel. Although Harsha has himself admitted that he didn't have a lot of logic between the way he subbed Raucus and Repel in and out, I think his Zen play is definitely good enough to warrant getting put in, especially over Fielder's Zen, who's a little bit weaker. And I wouldn't be surprised. So be aware of good backups and try not to get suckered into drafting those players. Now, I do have Fielder ranked higher than Repel, but for me, 23 is a little bit high for someone who could get subbed in and out based on meta, or even just based on getting outplayed by his respective teammate. Farway 1987 is another really interesting one. I have him ranked at number 11. Now that may be a little bit optimistic. I love this guy's play for Team CC. I feel like he's one of the reasons why Team CC did as well as they did. But even if you don't like him, Draftbuff has him ranked at 56. The entirety of Chengdu has 11 players, and the one position where they don't have that redundancy is in flex support. I think it's very likely he plays week in, week out. And if Chengdu can actually be a mid-tier APAC team, Farway is going to be producing chunk fantasy stats week in, week out. Next example is Bianca, who is rated at number 76. I have him personally at number 33. And then we've also got Molfig, who Draftbuff has at 77, who I have at number 40. Now, these aren't two guys that I'm extremely excited about, but I think they're solid off-tanks who are OWL level. And their teams will not be complete dumpster fires. I think they'll be on the lower tier of their respective regions, but they should be competitive. And I once again don't think you want to underestimate those solid off-tanks on mediocre to bad teams who are going to churn out stats. They have guaranteed value, at least as close to guaranteed value as you can get. So don't underestimate those contributing Octanes. Last but not least, I've kind of gone to the well already, but I'm going to do it once more. Exy is ranked number 9 on Draftbuff, and I personally have him ranked at number 47. This is a situation where real life value I don't think mirrors fantasy. There's some serious risk that there are Sparkle Doha metas where those two guys are in, especially in projectile or tracer metas, and I think there's a good chance that Exy gets benched from time to time. So I love the player. So long as he is in and not playing Widowmaker, he'll produce some serious value, probably top 10 value. He did that while he played last year and was free from injury. But week to week, you could get some duds where you might start him, and dependent on meta, depending on Dallas's strategies, he may not play. So 47 might be a little bit harsh, putting him behind guys like Kevster and Dante, who I believe he's better than. But I also think those guys have a much greater chance to have, to be workhorses, to be in very frequently. And regardless of meta, they're going to be the foundation or cornerstone pieces to their teams based on their general skill level and the talent around them. So yes, I like Exy better than those players individually. But when you're looking at trying to predict playtime, which is extremely difficult to do, I don't get as much comfort with Exy. So that's all I got for you today. Short video. Wanted to give you a primer on these key files. This cheat sheet should hopefully be very helpful for you as you're going through your drafts. And once again, as I mentioned before, a few quick housekeeping items. 1, here's my Draftbuff league. I'm not trying to advertise to do something. I just want to have people to play fantasy with. And if you're watching this channel and enjoying it, I'd love to play some fantasy with you. So we'll get a Discord conversation going once you join. And I would love to talk Overwatch with you. If a lot of people are interested, I'll open up multiple leagues. So if you try to join and it's full, hit me up on Twitter or Discord, which are displayed here, as well as in the show notes as well. And of course, if you just have fantasy questions about ranks, if you want to tell me my ranks are terrible, or if you just have questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. Like I said, I love talking about this stuff. I'm making a stupid YouTube channel specifically about Fantasy Overwatch, for crying out loud. And the last thing, the only selling that I'll do is I'm really excited. I'm close to 100 subs, which for me is a landmark. If you would like some draft consulting via a phone call or discussion, I'll gladly talk with you for 30 minutes, but your price is to show me that you are subscribed to the channel. Go ahead and unsubscribe after we talk, especially when I give you bad advice, but that's your price of admission for a conversation rather than just a back and forth Discord or Twitter DM. That's it. Sorry for no film today. We'll get back into it soon, but with fantasy getting announced, I kind of want to give major fantasy news here. And for me, the cheat sheet is my landmark document that I work on. So very proud of it. I will continue to tweak it before the season. I'm also going to have links to the videos that I've posted previously, so you can access those from within the document as well, in case you're interested in those. That's it. Have a good one, and join my league. Let's do this. Have some fun.